Skyrocket Your Startup. I'm so excited that you're here to join us, Stephanie. It's been so good to see your podcast and all the work you've been doing with financeability.
Well, thanks for having me, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about ways that we can help more startups grow. And I do know that a lot of the barriers that people see when they're trying to grow their startup is around funding. So I'm guessing that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of folks are trying to navigate, when to go for funding. Maybe they've had some successes throughout the pandemic. Luckily, I've heard some good success stories over the last year. And, I think entrepreneurs are trying to figure out like how early and if we are profitable, do we spend the time to go look for funding? When is the best time?
So, you know, the old saying, the best time to look for money is when you don't need it. And there is always a grain of truth in that. It is a much easier investment ask if you are looking for funding to repeat something that you already do well and to scale it than if you're trying to figure something out for the first time. So something that might work with some of the folks who've worked with you is if you already have an established sales process and you have a good way to get clients to learn about you, connect with you, and then purchase your product, spending more investment dollars to make that happen faster by staffing up, by automating, that's something an investor is going to get really excited about. Spending money to help you figure out how to get people to buy is a little harder ask.
Yeah. Really, when you have that proven product market fit, right?
Yeah. And you have some of the processes that go around it, like a good sales and marketing process. Another one that a lot of times is very attractive to investors is if you can demonstrate that your customer service keeps people from churning. That can also help investors understand why you're going to scale up, why you need to bring on personnel, or maybe expand in a different way.
Yeah, definitely. Reducing the churn is always something that it should be top of mind, right? Some folks are still trying to get, the first customers outside of the first, 3 to 5 that they might have on their MVP stage, but trying to figure out that repeatable customer base, that ideal customer base that can be really attacked from a market standpoint is huge. Not an easy task at all.
No, and it's so funny because a lot of times when people are like, well, I talked to an investor and they told me I needed more traction. I don't understand what they meant. And sometimes that's what the investor is talking about, right? I need to see that what you've told me works for the 3 to 5 people who you've known for 20 years who bought your product because they waited for it to be developed. How's that going to translate to the real world when you're actually using cold connections to try to sell?
Yeah. That's a great point, Stephanie. Can you give us a little bit of background and how you got to where you are today, how you started your company, and what drove you to become the thought leader that you are today?
Well, thank you first. It's an honor that you think I'm a thought leader. I appreciate having a different approach to a lot of the finance stuff that is so important to early stage startups. And that comes from having a background both in investment banking, which I did for about 10 years, both here and in Europe, and working in a high-tech manufacturing startup that was funded by both venture capitalists and angels. And so through those two experiences, I actually recognized that there are tons of early stage entrepreneurs who just don't have the financial background to navigate a lot of those really complex things that happen when you're raising seed or Series A funding.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you think that an early stage founder should go about getting those, acquiring those skill sets?
So I think one of the most important things to recognize when it comes to fundraising is that it is a sales and marketing process. And so on one hand, don't be totally freaked out because you do know how to do this, right? If you've had success if you've had success acquiring clients, this is something you know how to do. Yeah. But the other piece of it is it's not something that happens overnight. Right. And so a lot of people wait to raise money until they feel like, hey, I've only got, 3 to 6 months of runway left. I really better get out there and fundraise and make this happen. Yeah. And just like it's hard to establish that relationship and that process when you're trying to sell something to someone for the first time on the client side, it's awfully hard to be successful doing that on the investor side as well.
Yeah, definitely. At what stage do you think that clients should really start to look at outside investments?
So I think it's really interesting because a lot of what I talk about is what you want to do with your business. And so I think we hear in the popular press that the path to success, right? I'm using air quotes, success, is raise a bunch of money, either get acquired or have an IPO, and anything other than that is not success.
Mhm.
And so I would say, first off, before you think about raising money, think about what you want to do with your business.
Mhm.
Because ultimately what you're looking for when you raise capital is a partner for the life of your business.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if you're not clear about what you want to do, even if you are a good fit for an investor, they're going to ask you the question and you're going to have a wishy-washy answer. And they're going to be like, meh, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, if you're trying to kind of figure that out as a founder, there's a lot of startup companies out there that may be listening into this. Software obviously is a big one. Cybersecurity services, people that have been in managed services. So people that are focused on, that long-term reoccurring revenue model. They may be first-time founders though, and they may be coming, from corporate or different areas. So at what point do you think that, when do they start to consider the VC over the angel investor? Like, what types of investors should they be looking for? Let's say if they're going for their first seed round.
Yeah. So generally speaking, and this is a trend that's happening in the investment world, successful venture capitalists are raising larger and larger funds, meaning that they're investing at later and later stages because they need to write big checks to get their money to work for them.
Sure.
And so a lot of time if it's the first money in to your company, you're probably not in venture capital territory. You might be. Now there are some seed funds out there, some, pre-seed, some mango seed, anyway, all kinds of cool jargon terms.
Yeah.
But by and large, if you're in your first round, you're probably going to be looking at angel investors.
Yeah.
And in that case, what you really want to think about is, if you had to convince somebody to write a check from their own checkbook, what do you think they would need to see in terms of traction in your business to get them excited? Because it's not enough to get people to be like, oh, I'd consider that. You want people who listen to what you're saying and are like, ooh, I need to do this, and let me call 3 friends so that they can get in on this deal too.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that people should attempt it like as a typical like pitch, with their deck and making everything look pretty with all of their numbers? Is it more relationship building, a combination?
So I think it is a combination, but I think it's about understanding that this is a process, right? Just like in a sales process. If you go to somebody, you have coffee with them, and all of a sudden you're trying to sell them over coffee.
Yeah.
Well, depending on your product, that may or may not work really well, right? And so it's about really understanding who your ideal investor would be. So if you're thinking angel investors, those are individuals. They're all different. So maybe you need people who really deeply understand your industry, because if they don't, you're going to spend all your time trying to explain your industry to them. So get really good at identifying who your ideal investor is, and then build relationships with them. I encourage you to reach out and say, we're expecting to raise later this year.
Yeah.
And we're starting to explore potential partnership opportunities. Would you be interested in a company in our space with this kind of traction? And that way you're not committing to a pitch meeting, and they aren't either. You're just committing to starting the conversation.
Yeah, I love that kind of tip, because you're opening up the doors for ongoing relationship building, referrals, all of those good things that are going to generate, instead of just going out there and kind of doing the pitch throw up, as I say.
Yeah, well, and it's like permission-based marketing, right? Once somebody says, yeah, I want to follow what's happening in your company, then the easiest thing in the world is to prepare a monthly update that you send to all those folks. And so then before you ever pitch them, they've seen 3 to 6 months of traction. They've seen how you communicate, how you handle both the ups and the downs of your business. And they already kind of know you before you ever ask them to write a check.
Yeah. I love that. We've all seen the entrepreneur pitch on like Shark Tank, right? And when they're asking for a high investment number, a lot of times they miss the mark on a realistic number that can be consumed or even considered by the investor, right? The percentage of ownership. And we've seen the Shark Tank guys like laugh them off stage. How can the founder really avoid being in that situation and estimate the right investment ask?
Yeah. So tip number 1 is don't go on Shark Tank, because Shark Tank is more about entertainment than it is investment. Although I have worked with founders who have been in that situation and they have done well there. So it's not that it never works, but I think you need to have the right expectation of what the conversation is going to be about. And I would say when you're specifically thinking about your ask, what you want to do is you want to identify where your business is now,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to see what your next milestone might be. So let's say that you're trying to raise a first round of funding and you're looking at, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million, right? Well, you want to look at what your ARR or your MRR is now, and you want to see what it's going to take to get to the next milestone that would make you attractive to the next set of investors. Right. So for example, if I'm raising seed right now and I know that to be at Series A, I need to have 100,000 MRR.
Yeah.
Well, okay, 100,000 MRR is my milestone. What do I need to do between now and the time I hit that 100,000? And how much is it going to cost me? Right. Because once you can say to an investor, hey, I'm looking for $1 million and that's going to get me to 100,000 MRR, they're going to perk up their eyes and say, oh, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it and make that connection that way.
Yeah.
Tell me more. Right.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I love that. When working with a lot of SaaS companies, one of the first things we start to do when we engage from a sales perspective is really start to make sure that metrics are down, right? It's the MRR, the ARR, but also understanding what that lifetime value of the customer is.
Yep.
So that way you can really understand how, what do we need to do to really make that scalable? Because you have to back out the churn. That's inevitable. That's going to happen. You're going to have to back out some of the operational numbers.
Exactly. And I think the other piece of it is it's really demonstrating that the numbers in your business, right? Yeah. Because everybody's like, oh, okay, well, to be successful in SaaS, I need a 1 to 3 CAC to LTV ratio.
Yeah.
Well, that may be true in your kind of business, but it could also be that your ratio needs to be a lot higher because you have higher churn or because of the type of client you have. And so I think that's where you taking ownership of the numbers of your business and the metrics and really knowing that helps me identify more ideal clients. That helps me refine my sales process. That helps me operationally provide for them, is going to make you more successful and make you more attractive to investors.
Yeah, that's great. What are the top tech investment trends you're seeing, this year between seed, Series A?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I don't know, you probably don't follow the investment press the way I do, but one of the big surprises is that I think either Q4 of last year or Q1 of this year have been one of the most successful deployments of capital in recent history. And a lot of people, especially founders, I think, are surprised to hear that because they're like, well, I tried to raise money and I really struggled. And so one of the trends that I am seeing is that there is an increasing divide between these really big rounds that are getting high dollar investments from sort of well-known investors and some of these sort of medium-sized and medium level traction deals that are struggling quite a bit more. And so I think what you want to think about is first off, just understand where you fit in the market, right? If you're an incredibly hot deal and you know that it's time to strike while the iron's hot, raise a lot of funds and keep trucking.
Yeah.
If you're encountering resistance because perhaps you don't have as much traction as you would like or as investors would like to see at your stage, it might be time to reevaluate whether now is a good time to raise money, or if you should put your head down, focus on sales, perhaps for the next 3 to 6 months, and then come back at it when you're ready. The reason for that is a lot of times in that not hot deal space, if you get kind of pegged as a stale deal, meaning that you've been on the market too long, it can be really challenging to come back from that.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I also think founders should spend time really proving out the sales model, right? Doing the sales themselves. I mean, obviously that's what they do. They have to step into that role or continue it from years past. Knowing when to get out of that and scale at the right time is a whole different story. But really proving that out to make sure you have that locked in before you go to someone else and say, yeah, we know this is going to be successful, right? I think sometimes people can get over their skis a little bit, get really excited about the hype, but maybe they haven't spent the 3 to 6 months to really prove out that the market is responding in the same way that they would anticipate.
Well, and I think some of that's also understandable when a lot of what we see is that, well, the next step is to raise money, right? Oh, great. I had some early sales. I have product market fit. Now it's time to raise money. I would challenge people who think that they need to raise money to really identify what they would do with it, I call this the $1 million question, and it doesn't have to be a million, but if you think you need money, what would you invest that money in if I wrote you the check? I'm not writing checks, by the way. This is not an advertisement, but if someone wrote you that check today, do you know what you would do immediately to deploy the capital? And do you know what return you would get from making those investments?
I think that's the key right there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no to either of those questions, money is not your issue.
Yeah. I love it. Well, Stephanie, you provided such great insight for our founders here today. What else would you like them to know about either what you're seeing in the industry, things that you can help them with?
Well, of course, if you're looking for funding in the coming year and you're kind of saying to yourself, I'm not sure what the landscape looks like, I'm not sure exactly where to start, I would love to talk to you. I do have a lot of free resources on my website, stephaniesims.com. You're welcome to go there and check those out. I also would encourage anyone who thinks that they are going to raise capital later this year to start compiling a list of your target investors, because that's going to be the key to your success. Just like you have to identify an ideal client for your product or service, you've got to know who your ideal investor is, because that way, when someone says to you, hey, I'm excited about your deal, who else are you looking for? What kind of investors are you looking for? You're not fumbling around saying, well, someone with a checkbook. You're actually saying, here, maybe here's my name list. I want to talk to these specific people. Or at the very least, you're saying, I'm looking for folks who've been in my industry, have had C-level positions and deeply understand this particular problem.
Yeah, definitely. And do you feel like people should really anticipate that cycle of finding the right investor to be like 3 months or 6 months? Should they plan longer these days, since it is, such a busy time?
I think you can be more successful raising capital if you have more time on your side, right? Goes back to the whole, you can always raise money when you don't need it.
Right.
But I think if you're being strategic about your fundraising, what you really want to do is understand not just how long your runway is, but when you're going to hit that milestone, right? That next kind of big milestone, and then make your decision. Do I want to fundraise before or after I hit that milestone? And how is this investment that I'm going to be making in my business going to show that return, so that when I'm out there kind of hustling and saying, okay, great, I've been talking to you guys for 6 months and you've seen everything I've done. Now I'm going to be fundraising, and here are the terms of my deal. Here is when it's going to close. Here's how the process is going to run. You're in a much stronger position, because you're not kind of showing up at the last minute and saying, oh, and by the way, can you do this next week?
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Well, I'm so excited that we can introduce, the audience to you. I think you are a great resource. I know that we've been on some panels together through the different startup groups here in town, mentoring folks, and definitely a pleasure, Stephanie. I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thanks so much, Amy. It's a pleasure. And yeah, it's been great getting to know you through the different events that we've been working on together with startups. And of course, I appreciate the opportunity to share what I know and try to help more people find the funding that they need to grow their business.
Excellent. All right. Well, we will include the links here at the end of our video so that they can find you, and we'll continue the dialogue.
Sounds great.
Awesome.